This is Toon Talk Weekly, episode 244. This week, Brad and I are joined by our good buddy Chad Ashley to talk about the wide world of the series that is Looney Tunes.
Say, Doc, are you trying to get yourself in trouble with the law? This ain't rabbit hunting season.
It's not?
No, it's duck hunting season.
That, sir, is an investigated fabrication. It's rabbit season.
Duck season.
Rabbit season.
Duck season.
Rabbit season.
Duck season.
Rabbit season.
Rabbit season.
Duck season.
Rabbit season.
I say it's duck season, and I say fire.
The day just keeps getting better.
Boy.
Where is that kid?
Hey everyone, welcome back to Toon Talk Weekly. This is Toon Talk Weekly, episode 244, and this week is a special episode. I've been teasing it for a couple of weeks, and we finally nailed it down. I'm Jake Williams. I'm not your only host today. Of course, Brad Chmielewski's here with me. What's up, Brad?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well, man. And of course, if you're watching the video version, the surprise is spoiled because we have a special guest this week, our buddy Chad Ashley. Chad, what's going on, man?
Hey, how you guys doing?
Doing well, dude.
Excellent.
Glad to finally get you on the show after our conversation a few months ago.
Yeah, that seemed like it was a really long time ago, but it probably wasn't that long ago, really.
I feel like it was around Christmas time when I was in town, and somebody I think maybe Brad mentioned to me that you had brought up Toon Talk, and I was like, yeah, I need to get more guests on. I'm just the worst at reaching out to people. So.
That it's hard, man. We've the podcast that we do at GSG. We always after every episode we're like, you know what, we should get some more guests. It would make this so much easier if we just had someone else to talk to and just get out of this rut. And then we never do, because we have other stuff that we just start getting busy with and we just forget. Glad to be here.
Cool, man. And I think Brad and I run into that too. There are episodes we've said it before. Not every episode can be a winner, and sometimes Brad and I are just like not on the same page with an episode. So a guest who's an expert in a certain field, or at least someone who also likes a show we're talking about, super helps. And we like those episodes way more than just hearing us blab about a cartoon.
Mm-hmm. And this Looney Tunes here was something that just was too big, I think, for us to tackle alone.
Well, glad I could be here to help you tackle this beast.
Yeah, so this week we're talking about Looney Tunes. This is, like Brad said, this is one that's kind of been in the hopper for a long time. There are, of course, when you start a Toon Talk or a cartoon podcast, you do start thinking about the pantheon, the greats of cartoons, and of course this came up, but it was something that I guess Brad and I never really felt, at least I personally never felt like really in tune with Looney Tunes. It's something that I watched a lot as a kid, but it was something that I definitely have not revisited since being an adult. And this felt like the perfect time, I think, to finally bring it out, to actually get some expert help on this.
This is when I found out that you hadn't talked about it, I was like, what? Like, how is this even a thing? Like, that should have been episode in the first week of episodes. But anyway, well, you're just saving it for this.
Well, there's a lot of opinions and thoughts on Looney Tunes and Tex Avery and that whole world. So I felt like we maybe needed a few years under our belts of cartoon knowledge and talking about them to even dive in.
Hey, yeah, man. I mean, this is one of my favorite cartoons. Probably, it's my favorite cartoon of all time. It's really what catapulted me into where I am. Because I went to school for traditional animation. Like, that's what I thought I wanted to be when I grew up. And so that's really like the comedy, the timing, the look of it, the feel of it was just so cool to me as a kid that I wanted to do that for a living. Like, I wanted to be well, by the time I was in college, the Warner Brother golden age had long since gone, and nobody was really doing cartoons like that. So, like, I don't know, it was just sort of like this nostalgic feeling of those early days, the golden era of Looney Tunes, that just kind of made me kind of get into film and get into animation. And I sort of fell into CG because of, for those of you that don't know, I work at Grayscale Gorilla. I do a lot of computer graphics type stuff. And so I didn't want to do anything with computers. I wanted to do this. I wanted to do Looney Tunes. Yeah. And it turns out that I couldn't draw good enough. Went to college, and I went to Columbia College in Chicago, and I graduated with a degree in animation and film as a concentration. And I thought I was going to work at like Don Bluth. Have you guys done any Don Bluth episodes? Like he did like Rats and Nim, or The Secret of Nim rather. And he did, no wait, did he do Secret of Nim? No. I'm pretty sure he did Secret of Nim, which is, if you haven't seen that movie, it's a fantastic movie. That's a great movie, yeah. Anyway, so he was kind of like he was sort of doing a lot of good stuff at that time, and that's what I wanted to do. Graduated from college. Long story short, I didn't have the line quality needed to work at like a Disney level. And I found out in a really harsh interview. I think I talk about it on one of our podcast episodes actually, and it totally just punched me in the stomach. And so then I switched to CG, and now I'm here. But yeah, this like Looney Tunes, man, there's just so many themes and so many it's chock full of humor, amazing art, amazing characters, amazing animation. They had it all, man. They had it all. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those things for me growing up. I know that Looney Tunes was, by the time I was, a kid watching cartoons, it was way into syndication, right? They weren't really making any of like the new ones at that point. I think they've done a handful of reboot series here and there, and of course Space Jam. Like there are modern things they've done with the license. We'll leave Space Jam out of this. I can see that didn't go over well.
Yeah, just anything that happened after 1965, I don't have any interest in.
Yeah, but what's so funny is that actually this week I caught a couple of episodes over on Cartoon. I think Cartoon Network's Boomerang service has. It's only like $5 a month, and they have almost everything. They definitely were missing some titles. I was like, looking up some of the great titles that I should see and check out, and definitely some of them weren't on there. And I have to imagine that based on when the cartoons were made, some of the content was actually changed or altered when they actually went to syndication because they didn't want overly violent things or overly. I think it was actually an episode that Brad and I talked about of Mighty Mouse that was just Mighty Mouse running away from these wolves that smoked cigars and shot guns at him. Like it was the
pretty violent and scary.
That sounds like an amazing cartoon. I want to see that cartoon. And it's back then that you shot guns. Like there was guns in cartoons. There was like guns with bullets. Yep. If you haven't watched old Johnny Quest, Hanna-Barbera Johnny Quest from the 60s, like that was like people were getting shot, and it was like, oh, it's just how it was. Right. And then later, cartoon violence sort of went crazy with Tex Avery. Tex Avery was sort of like, he was just out of his mind. That dude was a genius, and he would just do the wildest stuff. And that's sort of where, if you're a Simpsons fan, you can tie almost every gag that Itchy and Scratchy does to some sort of Tex Avery-esque sort of gag. Not directly. I mean, they kind of like caricaturized it like crazy, but a lot of that came from this group, the early Warner Brothers Looney Tunes people. I mean, they were just given complete autonomy to do whatever the hell they wanted every single time they made a film, and they didn't really have to answer to anybody, and it shows on the screen. Like it was some really crazy shit. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, of course.
I guess I should have asked that. But yeah, dude, speaking of like shocking moments, Warner Brothers was not without their shocking sort of moments. And I remember one particular cartoon that was banned from Boomerang and banned from syndication, which is, I forget which episode it was, but so I think it's a Bugs Bunny Elmer Fudd episode where Bugs Bunny is trying to get away, or being chased, obviously, and he falls asleep somehow. And so, of course, Elmer Fudd decides he's gonna I got to chase him in his dreams, right? So he like pops open a bottle of sleeping pills and like downs the entire bottle of pills.
Okay.
And then like just zonks out and goes chasing him in his dreams. And like I remember watching that when I was a kid and thinking, oh, that's hilarious. And now later on, I realized that it wasn't on anymore because they pulled it, and there's quite a few episodes that they pulled for even crazier reasons than that. But that one stuck for some reason.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that they didn't, the creators, the guys that were actually working on and making Looney Tunes, didn't really have to answer to a whole lot of people. I did dig up this short documentary. It's maybe like 40, 50 minutes. I think it's called Irreverent Animation or something like that, talking about a little bit of the backstory of the studio. So of course, correct me if I'm wrong here, but they had Looney Tunes, but they also had Merry Melodies at the time too, right? But it sounded like Merry Melodies was those animators and artists got to be in the nice building with the execs and stuff and basically make cartoons that were trying to sell music that Warner Brothers owned. And then Looney Tunes was, they still obviously were trying to compete with Disney. So they had this other kind of arm who had to work in, what did they call it? They called it like Termite
Terrace.
Termite Terrace, right? This like just broken down crappy building. But it seems like the group of people that were working on these cartoons were this cast of characters themselves that almost like thrived in that environment, that they're like, well, they're just letting us do what we want to do. And that's why you get some of these absolutely wacky 7-minute short cartoons.
Yep, that's exactly it. I mean, these guys were, they were sort of having fun with being the outcasts, and they would just invent gags and just sort of hone their craft of like comedic timing and just they just had so much talent. And then to have like Mel Blanc doing the voices, who was the best voice artist of all time for cartoons, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the guy was a genius, and he just, the whole team was just insane. And the stuff that would happen in Termite Terrace was really just so much hijinks. There is the story about Tex Avery losing his eye, which I think happened there, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to look it up here so I'm not mistaken. I think, so they would get into these fights with paper clips and rubber bands, and he lost his eye when they all were just like screwing around, and somebody got him in the eye, and like he lost his sight, or he lost the use of his eye, which is crazy, man. Like, think about that. Like, that could never happen now without the studio being sued into oblivion. And these guys were just crazy, man. Like, just insane.
Yeah, I was in that documentary. They mentioned some other prank that was called like the hot foot or something, where they would light matches under other people's shoes without them knowing until it started to burn you, which in itself is a gag that got translated into many Looney Tunes cartoons.
Oh yeah, the hot foot, man. Yeah.
But when I was telling Brad about that, I was like, man, these guys were hardcore with their pranks. The worst thing we do is like change your coworker's desktop background and like, that's funny, huh? Like,
yeah. I mean, so think about Jackass. Jackass actually has a lot of Looney Tunes stuff going on. And there's all sorts, like Looney Tunes and their whole like style of humor kind of infiltrated our culture in so many different ways that I don't think people even realize.
Yeah, it's kind of nuts now revisiting this as an adult, right? So I mentioned that I only really watched it as a kid. It was one of those things that was always on TV. Pretty much any weekend, any given weekend, any given afternoon, there were probably a Looney Tune or two kind of smashed in with whatever programming. I don't remember if it was strictly Cartoon Network that had it. I know I watched a lot of Nickelodeon as a kid too, so wherever it was, I saw a bunch of it. But revisiting it now is like this treasure trove of seeing like masterclass in so many different things. There's so much you can appreciate about it. Obviously, we mentioned the violence up ahead earlier. Like, yeah, looking at anything old with a lens of today, you're gonna feel that way. We brought it up with Mighty Mouse, and we brought it up before, but there's just something so. I was amazed at how many episodes I was able to pull up and remember sitting there seeing those stories. And now, working in animation for a living, like picking it apart than I was watching the story, really, like seeing what these random smear frames or these like in between frames look like.
Oh man, those things are the best. If you pause any of Tex Avery was famous for the take, and like the take was like his thing, and I would dissect his takes because they were just filled with just surreal strangeness. Where you'd have a character do like a take, oh, and the eyeballs would like go crazy, and there'd be like 5 eyeballs. And there'd be like, these weird frames where you're like, how does that even make sense? But it does, It's just, I love that stuff, man.
There was some frame where I can't quite remember the situation, but Daffy Duck gets hit on the head with a mallet. And the way that his head shakes, if you pause between any of those frames, the shape is not of his head whatsoever. It could look like an ogre, like it's kind of 2-head, it's split, it's stretched and wiggled around. Like there's definitely a lot to pick apart. But there's also something like so like weirdly wholesome about like the fact that a lot of their comedy is from these different gags that the characters would do to one another, but that still for some reason made me laugh more now than it did then. Like maybe I can appreciate the simplicity of it rather than like this long setup that maybe a current cartoon might do. And that's probably generalizing, but still, like, I just felt like it was so simple and so innocent to go back, even if it was violent.
Well, too, you're probably also looking at it through the lens of today, which is you probably can't get away with a lot of the stuff that they were doing back then. So there's like a little bit of like a whoa, like that actually played back then. I mean, yeah, there are cartoons now that are way more, I would say, subversive or violent or sexual, but those aren't usually watched. Those aren't for kids. Like they were kids watching this. I was watching this when I was, 7, 6 years old, and so that's what's interesting to me. You watch it now. I watched it when I had kids. I bought like all of them that I could get my hands on DVD, and I made my kids watch them, and then I also would tell them who the director was and whether or not that was a good director, to the point where they would be watching it. They would be on Boomerang or whatever, and it would come on, and they'd look at me and they'd be like, "Is this one okay to watch, Dad?" And I'd be like, "Is that Frizz feeling? Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you're good." and let him finish it, and anytime a Chuck Jones one would come on, I'd be like, skip.
Now, is this based on personal taste or based on content that you would want to watch it?
All personal taste.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I'm like, they probably, if they liked Chuck Jones, that's totally up to them. I'm not a big Chuck Jones fan. I like what he did later. When he started doing stuff in the 70s and in the 60s with oh man, he did like a lot of the Grinch stuff, and I don't know what studio that was, but that stuff was okay to me. But I just never liked his style when he was doing stuff for Looney Tunes. And I guess it comes down to the way that he draws Bugs Bunny. Always had this sort of weird feminine quality to it that just didn't feel edgy to me. It just felt too cute and too soft. And I didn't like, and a lot of the stories that I think he directed were okay, but they were never like great. And so yeah, it's just one of those directors that just never really did it for me. I was more of like if I had to pick my top, it would be like Tex Avery for sure, but he wasn't there for a super long time. Friz Freleng for sure. In fact, I have my picture taken with Friz Freleng's star on the Walk of Fame in my bedroom.
Oh, awesome.
And then Bob Clampett, freaking genius. Yeah, those are kind of my top 3, I think. Those are like my favorites.
Well, yeah, talk about like the stories and being different from the cartoons now. Like so much of Looney Tunes is just like this one character is chasing or trying to get this other character to eat them, kill them, fall in love. And that's just the simple plot. And there's almost no cartoons now where like it's based on someone chasing someone to do something to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that
teach necessarily, but
it's such a great premise. It never gets old because You basically the setup is smart aleck, witty smart aleck, smart ass, just foiling some doofus, and like that's pretty. that's the gag in almost every single one. It's like even the early days of Daffy. Daffy was basically a version of Bugs Bunny. Like he was this, but he had this like his thing was like I'm mentally ill, like I'm freaking crazy, like and so his thing was like I'm gonna torture Porky Pig by being crazy and just like completely torture this poor bastard. And then later he became Bugs Bunny's sort of foil, his nemesis, I guess, which I thought there were some interesting things that they did there, but I always thought it was funnier when Daffy was just like this crazy dude that you just you once he's in your house, you're like you're screwed. You can't get rid of this guy, and he's gonna ruin everything. And like I just love that, and yeah, and then I feel like I'm dominating this conversation, but I just love it so much. But yeah, there was I took a history of animation class when I was in college, and Porky Pig reminded me of it. But Elmer Fudd and Porky Pig are sort of the same character when you really think about it. And we did this whole class, we did this whole debate on Elmer Fudd actually being gay and being in the closet, and that's why he was so angry about Bugs Bunny, because he secretly loved Bugs Bunny. Okay. And we had this like whole debate on this subject, and everybody was just getting all into it. And it's really it makes some good points, or the argument had some good points to it, because if you really, I mean, there's a lot of cross-dressing. There's a lot of
Bugs Bunny dresses up quite a bit.
Yeah, and Elmer Fudd does too. In fact, one of my favorite episodes, I think, oh man, it's going to bug me, but one of them where Elmer Fudd actually gets put into a dress and lipstick and stuff, and I don't know. I just always have this feeling that Elmer Fudd secretly loves Bugs. Now that just might be completely. It might not be sexual at all. It just might be that he wishes he could be more like Bugs, and wishes he could be more free and sort of a free spirit, and maybe he's bitter or resents Bugs Bunny in that way. Because when it comes down to it, and a few times when he's actually been able to almost kill Bugs Bunny, he feels bad, and he immediately feels remorse and wants to save him, and resuscitates him on several occasions, or tries to. And of course, Bugs Bunny was faking the whole time. But and Bugs Bunny just wanted to get him to say that he really liked Bugs, and then of course, joke's on him. But yeah, there's an interesting. What do you guys think about that? Like, what do you think Elmer Fudd was like secretly in love with Bugs Bunny?
It's kind of interesting because sometimes like it would end too with Bugs giving him a big old kiss on the lips too. That was the just as like a further taunting.
Yeah, and that was I think that was sort of done not just to provoke him, because it never really made him that angry, Right. Like it's interesting.
It is kind of interesting, and honestly, it's a topic that might be more overt in a cartoon these days, but it's something that was definitely taboo and not talked about like at all when these were created, right? So if it is a character trait, and who knows if we'll ever know, like nobody will ever come out and say whether or not they pictured this character in some sort of Looney Tunes character Bible, if he truly was. But boy, would that set the world on fire! Like, I mean, if that came out, like
that, it probably was being said around Termite Terrace, but never made its way into a model sheet.
Yeah. Dang, man. And also, I looked up a few of them too. I didn't realize, obviously, there is an order that these cartoons were kind of released. Was it so typically not thought of in the pantheon of Looney Tunes, although he was an actual Looney Tunes? Wasn't Bosco a totally separate thing that was before? Was that a character created by Warner Brothers that was before these guys became big? I think that was his name.
That was real. That was in the 30s, I think.
That was like that was studios trying to compete, trying to make the Mickey Mouse, basically, like having a character that would catch on. I found that pretty interesting, but it wasn't until, it looks like 1935 was the first Looney Tune. Porky Pig was actually the first one, it sounds like.
Yeah.
which is funny because I guess it makes sense that you wouldn't have your cult fan favorite that breaks the mold of pop culture as your first one, because I would consider that to be Bugs Bunny, the one that actually like crossed over into what.
Right. Yeah.
When people think of Looney Tunes, they probably think of Bugs in their first breath, right? That was only 5 years later, but still, that's 5 years of shorts.
Cool. Yeah, and Porky Pig becoming big. It's when you have a character that's an animal that you also eat quite a bit. Is kind of like maybe kids are like not wanting to eat bacon and things like that because they're like, oh, I love Porky Pig, right?
Yeah, that I'm not sure. Like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I ever made that connection when I was a kid. If I was like even aware of what bacon came from, you know, like, but yeah, it is interesting that that he was the first, and that he largely, I think he stuck around. Like, he's probably the longest. He's the character that's been around the longest, I'd imagine. Then.
Yeah, so I had down here just my quick notes were 35 for Porky Pig, 37 for Daffy Duck, and then it was Bugs and Elmer Fudd in 1940. So, but then what I found even crazier is, like, obviously revisiting this as an adult, like, the names keep coming of characters that I totally remember that I can't believe are all part of the same series. That these artists have created a legacy of this, and while they all might not cross over into pop culture phenomenon that maybe Bugs Bunny does, but like going down the list of Yosemite Sam and Sylvester and Tweety and Foghorn Leghorn and Marvin the Martian, and like then also seeing the numbers next to them, the actual years that they came out, made me realize like there's totally different eras of this cartoon when a kid might have first seen this. But it's also kind of funny that me, like growing up in the 90s, like I would have seen these all as one, right? So the years and the maybe differences of directors and things didn't matter. But now, as an adult, like I want to dive in and actually check out the differences between, like you were saying, Chad, like directors have different styles. And I think there's a lot more to unpack there, I think, by revisiting this series if somebody hasn't done it in a long time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and especially the eras, too, because I would say that my favorite time was in the 40s, like during and around World War II, where some of the best, just the best stuff was going on. Then later in the 50s, you had like Foghorn Leghorn and those characters and whatnot. And I think if you watch them sort of on shuffle, like you would on like Boomerang or whatnot, you can tell which ones are older and which ones are newer. But one thing, it's hard to tell when it gets down to like, you know, a 5-year span or even a 8 to 10 year span. It's hard to tell the difference, but there was a lot of difference there. And you should go back and watch the 40s and the 50s again, because that's really, in my opinion, the best stuff. Like I didn't really like, I was never really a Pepe Le Pew fan. He was always just such a creep to me.
Yeah.
And like that dude could never exist now, you know. He would just be he'd be called out.
Probably crossing some lines these days.
But Foghorn Leghorn was pretty awesome, I have to say. He cracked me up. I never got into Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. That just got so old so fast for me that it just never. There was never a payoff, and you knew there was never going to be a payoff, and all the landscapes were very much the same, and there was never really a lot of creativity in the gags, I thought, in those.
So I'd love to see what invention he may have ordered. That was what you were always looking for. Like, what was it going to be this time?
It was always rocket skates, dude. It was always rocket skates. Like almost every time, it was like a rocket on something, or a rocket on a skate.
Yeah, some sort of catapult.
Yeah, exactly.
I think totally. If anything, those ones like the Wile E. Coyote stuff was all like a practice in timing. It was all like, sure, there was no like concrete payoff of like, yes, he will never catch the Roadrunner. You just know he's going to get crushed, and it's like, how much anticipation can they build for like how many different ways can this one thing malfunction to crush him? But then, like you said, you do get maybe 5 or 6 of those in an episode, and it just kind of happens. It doesn't. Brad and I talk a lot on certain cartoons that feel like they don't go anywhere. Like you were just in the same spot you started in. And that sometimes doesn't add a lot to the flavor that something like what did I watch? I watched The Scarlet Pumpernickel, one of Sylvester's characters, and like that went somewhere. That was a lot of fun, and it was a whole story told by Sylvester, who was like, or no, sorry, was it Daffy, who was reading the script to an executive to sell this picture.
I totally remember that one.
Coming, Melissa!
Scarlet Pumpernickel. Hungah!
Repulse!
Capriole.
Chunksalices! You ain't got a chance. I'm the hero of this picture, and you know what happens to the villain.
So what's to know?
Clang, clang, boom, clang, clang.
Yeah, then what? Then what happened?
Yeah, then what happened?
Yeah, that's kind of what blew me away was the amount of them that I actually remembered. Another one that I watched was Foghorn Leghorn cartoon called Sock-a-Doodle Doo, and there was this prize fighting rooster, or rooster or chicken or something, which by the way probably also would be censored these days. But like
Totally.
he fell off a truck and ended up anytime he hears a bell, he just starts punching.
Oh my God, I love that.
I remember that one. Yeah.
And so of course it becomes this contest with Foghorn Leghorn and was it I don't know the dog's character. There's a dog in his cartoons too.
Yeah, the dog I think it was like who was going to ring the bell
Yes.
and like get the other one to get punched in the face.
Right.
Boy, what you need is a good workout.
Yeah. Wake up.
Listen to me, boy. Pay attention when I'm talking to you. Now, what you do, boy, go over to that little house over there and ask the dog for the punching bag. Go on, boy, get going. That boy's about as sharp as a bowling ball. Hey, what's a big idea swatting me on a schnozzola when I'm sleeping?
When I hit a bell, I'm just gonna start punching something.
And the final contraption was my favorite, which was there was apparently some sort of club that Foghorn Leghorn thought he was exclusive and he could get in, but it was a tree trunk that he stuck his head up into. And when his head pops out of the hole, he's in a little boxing ring on top of this log. And the dog is constantly ringing the bell as he's getting punched in the teeth. Like,
Yeah.
I forgot how good Foghorn Leghorn was, man. Like he would like go out and beat the crap out of that dog with a stick. Remember that? Like he would just beat him with a stick. Man, he was hilarious.
Probably some of the best wallops in the series came from Foghorn Leghorn.
Yeah.
Did you guys have a favorite character out of all of them?
That's a good question.
Man,
like
that's a tough one.
So, like, revisiting this, I will say, because I hadn't checked it out in years, when I thought of the Looney Tunes, I was thinking of Tweety Bird tattoos. Like, that's what popped into my head. And I hate that I thought that. So now, like...
I think the Looney Tunes got ruined in the early 90s with those horrible stores that happened.
Were they like Warner Brothers
and like
merch stores?
And like the appropriation of Looney Tunes characters by like I don't even know how to classify like who those people were, but I just felt like it ruined a lot of it for me when they like put Bugs Bunny in like a hip hop outfit and like and, like I was like what, like this is like the worst thing ever. So in the 90s, I was just ashamed to even say I was a Looney Tunes fan because it was like, oh, you are? Have you seen where he's like, Space Jam and all that? And I'm like, no, please.
Yeah, it's one of those things that once it crosses into the pop culture, the mainstream, and that was, it seems like just somebody had the license and wanted to sell a bunch of merchandise for something that people might have nostalgia for. But once it crosses past the films, like it becomes its own beast once people start taking control of it and what they give value to. And that's how you get things like Space Jam or other things that I don't mind, offshoots like Tiny Toons. I grew up with that and I was fine with that. So
yeah,
I'm okay with that kind of stuff. But sorry, I interrupted you, Chad, on if you had a favorite.
I'm trying to think. Like there's so many, man. I guess the ones that have brought me the most laughs, and I would say those would be Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. Mm-hmm. And then there's ones that I just think are really interesting and creative. I think that Oh man, probably like little characters that weren't even around that much. I really liked the big red hairy guy. God, what's his name?
Oh yeah.
The
Typically partnered with, wasn't he in the Marvin the Martian pictures?
No, he wasn't in the Marvin and the Martian ones. He was in the ones where they used to once in a while do the ones like the horror kind of ones, like the scary
right.
movie ones.
They had the one with the witch, right?
Yeah, there was the one with the witch too. That was a classic. That was one.
Yeah.
That was one I think Chuck Jones did that I didn't mind. Witch Hazel, I think was her name. She like that was pretty good.
Gossamer is what
Gossamer, yes, thank you very much. So I thought he was cool. Marvin the Martian he looked cool, but ultimately, I don't know, like he was cool, but sort of didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like Marvin a lot just for the look, and it brought us to a different world that as a kid you're like, oh my god, space, this is amazing, the future. Whoa.
Oh, we didn't even talk about all those future things they would do too. Like they would do the house of the future and like all that stuff, man. Oh, I loved those too. Those were so great. When they would also, what was like the house of the future? Then they had another one too where they would, I don't know, it was like
City of the Future. That kind of...
Yeah, or maybe it wasn't even Looney Tunes. It might have actually been MGM that did some of those too. MGM is a whole other Tom and Jerry and everything that was happening over there.
House of Tomorrow, the world of tomorrow, and the house of tomorrow. Yeah,
gotcha.
Those are Tex Avery.
Oh, dude, those are brilliant. Those are just. I want to go watch them after we're done now.
So those sound familiar. Like, were those? I can't remember. Those actually had the Looney Tunes characters in them, but they were just a different way of telling the story, or no?
No, there was
no Looney Tune characters, but you usually had like a normal looking person in them.
Right.
But it just had a lot of modern day stuff you would have thought of the future and things we actually have now. So in 1950s, we're like, oh my god, it's a microwave. Look at this.
It's probably even better to watch now.
But they're hilarious because everything always is like a lot of puns, like like tons of puns and like silly gags. But it's like, I don't know if you guys grew up reading Mad Magazine, but I grew up on Mad Magazine. So for me, that type of humor was just the best. It was like taking something and like skewing a word or having the outcome be something horribly wrong. And I just love that kind of humor. And those future ones are always like that. I'm trying to remember one of the gags, but it was like, one of them was like, tired of having your mother-in-law, be a backseat driver. We've got the car for you. And it's like a car where the front seat is like completely separated from the rest of the car, like in a bubble. And like the mother-in-law and the kids are like in this separate section in the back of the car, like 10 feet away. And the dad's just like driving happily down the road. And the mother-in-law is like screaming at him. It's like stupid stuff like that, but I love it.
Yeah, there's something so cool, man, about just revisiting this stuff that's like puts a genuine smile on my face when I'm watching this versus, there's modern cartoons that we talk about, and actually Brad and I like a lot of current cartoons that seem to come out every year or so. There's a couple of good releases that I know Brad ends up plowing through the whole season because he likes the characters in the world and stuff. But recently, like, I can't remember anything that's genuinely made me happy watching it, even if it was the situation maybe isn't PC by today's standards or whatever. There's just something weirdly wholesome in how wacky this stuff got. I can't really describe what that feeling is, but this stuff totally brings me back, like actually checking it out today. So
that's great. I want to hear what your favorite is. What's your favorite character?
Good question, man. Because I was like leaning on, I was like, I can't say Bugs.
Why can't you?
It's like
there's absolutely, if all signs point to Bugs.
Yeah, of course. But it's like saying, like, I don't know, my favorite basketball player is Michael Jordan all the time, for sure. Like, I don't know, it's like picking the thing that's the best.
Hey, well, Bugs had all the best lines. He had all the best gags. He was in all the best episodes.
That's true. So, they knew where the money was very shortly after creating Bugs. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah. And like, I don't even remember there being that much merchandise growing up either until the what would you call that? The appropriation of it in the 90s or whatever that was.
Is that also
But,
is that where Yosemite Sam mud flaps came from too? That era? That must be, right? Like
I think that was like in the 70s. I remember seeing those, like, because I don't know, he became like a mud flap character. Like, what was it, like, back off? Wasn't that what it said?
Or
like
something,
the mud flap would say back off, and he'd have his 2 6-shooters like pointed at you.
He became the like cartoon association with a rough and tumble kind of guy, like someone that will take you out if you're too close. Yeah.
And then there was all the people that thought the Tasmanian Devil was so awesome, and I'm like, I like the Tasmanian Devil, like, but he's not like amazing. There's one of my favorite Bugs Bunny cartoons is one where somehow Bugs gets delivered as a baby via a stork, of course, because there's several stork episodes that happen throughout Looney Tunes. Anyway, the stork, I think he was drunk. I'm pretty sure it was a drunk stork that accidentally delivers Bugs to a family of gorillas. And it is one of the best. It's just one of the best episodes because Bugs is like, hey, this is a pretty cush gig. This mom gorilla is really like, feeding me and like, taking care of me like I'm a little baby. But the dad gorilla is totally like knows that this is not their baby and wants to kill him. And so there's this great struggle in the whole episode where every time the mom looks away, the dad is like trying to beat the kid, Bugs Bunny, or kill him somehow. And it's just go watch that episode because it's got some great moments in it.
That's nice. Play horsey with baby.
Giddy up, horsey, giddy up. Hello, Daddy. Daddy's scaring me again. Give him another, Mommy, and another, bad old Daddy.
I wish I was like you just describing it makes me wish I was in the pitch meeting for like how that came to be because that sounds like a really fun storyboarding process.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one, man. Like that, and there's like so many. Like, yeah, I'm trying to think of one other one. There's one. I love the ones where there's one where there's 2 guys that get stranded on a deserted island, and the only thing on the island is Bugs Bunny, and so they've been out at sea starving to death. And they land on this island, and Bugs Bunny is like, "Oh, of course I'm gonna fuck with these guys." Like, yeah, and so these guys are like, they're trying to cook Bugs, and Bugs is just like basically messing with them. But there's a moment at the end that is just comedic brilliance, and they did this several times throughout Looney Tunes history, which is the whole like, I'm going to repeat something really fast and then swap it like halfway through and like fool you into thinking one thing. So anyway, a ship comes in to save them, like a big cruise liner. And they're like going to get on the ship to leave. And they're like, oh, bon voyage, bye, see ya, goodbye, see ya. And so Bug starts putting like, Hawaiian leis on them and whatnot. And they're just talking really fast. Bye, see ya, bon voyage, have a good trip. And then somewhere along the line, Bug starts putting the leis back on himself and taking their luggage and like starts walking up the side of the boat. And they start saying goodbye to him inversely until he's finally sailing away. And they're both like still saying goodbye and bon voyage and have a good trip. And then they kind of look at each other, and the one guy realizes it, the smarter one of the two, and the dumb one just keeps going, and the smart one just slaps him in the face. And it's like that stuff, man. It's like I love that stuff. I love it.
They did that stuff a lot with the Rabbit Season trilogy of cartoons, right? Where there's just lots of, at some point in each of those episodes, there is some sort of back and forth between Daffy and Bugs, yelling Rabbit Season or Duck Season, and of course, typically Bugs would get the upper hand. I think one of the ones I watched, I can't remember if I watched the third one or the first one of the series, but there was that exchange, and my favorite was like they kept having these exchanges where the end would be, Daffy yelling at Elmer to fire at whoever it was. But it was like after these and Daffy had gotten nailed a couple of times, that there was just this long silence, and all Bugs had to say was rabbit season as one word, and Daffy's response was duck season fire, like didn't even wait and just gets his face blown off, right? Like, it's just some great timing, and they definitely played that stuff up.
Let's try that again. Okay, I'll start it this time. Right. Rabbit season.
Duck season.
Rabbit season.
Wabbit season.
Duck season. Fire. Okay, this time you start it.
Whatever you say. Wabbit.
Duck, fire! What's the matter? Everything's upside down.
There was definitely some side characters that I remember as a kid that were only in, I think, one episode. I watched an episode of a Sylvester cartoon called Birds Anonymous, where Sylvester he joins some sort of cat group where he swears that he's not going to eat birds anymore, basically.
Oh, yeah.
And he sort of has a sponsor in a way where, like, he's this cat, this, like, droopy-faced looking creepy cat that really doesn't feel like he fits in the universe at all. It's almost like a human face on this cat. And I remember it being kind of scary as a kid, but just that he follows Sylvester around this entire episode. You know, Sylvester keeps having these mini lapses where he almost eats Tweety, and he, like, pours basically like quick dry cement or something in his mouth, so his mouth shuts so he can't eat Tweety. Like, it was just, it ended up being it's a weird subject matter for a kid, but I just remember that side character, that extra cat that was in the episode, kind of having a very strange look to him. So
I gotta look it up now. Now it's gonna bug me. What was the name of the episode?
Birds Anonymous. Yeah. And if you see the cat, I just feel like I guess he can kind of fit, but he's just got this, like, he looks like he's kind of strung out, like he hasn't had a bird in a while, basically. So that was definitely a fun one to revisit.
Oh yeah. I know what you're talking about now. I'm watching it, and is it the red cat? Is that the one?
Yeah. He just has an interesting look. It almost felt like it more of a human face than many of the characters. The exaggerated features some of these cartoon characters did have.
I'm trying to think of like some of the more creepy. There has been some moments where they went sort of creepy, especially with the. When they would, in the 40s, they would take a lot of the movie stars and caricaturize them in their in Looney Tunes. Frank Sinatra shows up, Peter Lorre showed up a lot, and he was always playing like the creepy, like mad scientist character. And I remember being a kid thinking, like, that dude's creepy. Like it like legit scared me when I was a kid. But yeah, I'm trying to think of there's another one that I can't think of that had like a weird face to it. And maybe it'll come to me.
I'm also picturing, I think it was a later one, and I think they talked about it in that documentary I watched, where it was a celebrity had noticed that other celebrities were being basically, like, some parodies were happening that were similar to those films, like The Honeymooners, or TV shows like The Honeymooners. And they basically asked, you know, can I be in the show or something? And they lent their voices to it. And I remember him being I think it was a mouse, and I can remember like an antique looking car and them driving up to get into a mouse hole to go to a club.
Yeah,
but I can't think of who the actor is.
Was it Jackie Gleason? And it was
that sounds familiar.
It was a Honeymooners episode where they basically did Honeymooners but with mice.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Honeymooners, that TV show spawned the Flintstones, and so many other parodies, and I think even Looney Tunes has done very similar formula to the Honeymooners at least 3 times before they even did that actual sort of like, I don't even, was Jackie Gleason in that one? Now I want to know. Now it's going to bother me.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's been some really good caricatures of celebrities throughout the Looney Tunes. Most of them, I didn't even really know who they were. I would have to ask my mom because she loved old movies.
Yep.
And so when I would see somebody that looked not of that universe, like too realistic or too sort of like human almost, I would have to be like, who's that supposed to be? And she's like, oh, that's supposed to be Frank Sinatra, or that's supposed to be what's that dude that has like the big nose and he would like say ha cha 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 cha, like that guy? I forget his name.
Man, I don't know either. It's way over my head too.
Jimmy Durante, I believe, is who that is, and I didn't know who that was, but it was funny. It popped up quite a bit, and my mom would have to tell me what those things were, and I'd be like, oh, okay, I have no idea who that is, but it's still pretty funny.
So being that I think that Looney Tunes is one of the, I mean, it's the classic television cartoon. I don't think not a lot of other ones come to mind as being something that's pretty universally known as a TV cartoon, right? Films stand the test of time a lot of times because it's something that people actively went and saw. But I think television cartoons, sometimes you did have to flip to the right channel to actually see things. So sometimes maybe that stuff doesn't stick around. I guess we've talked about Boomerang has a pretty good service for that kind of stuff, but I guess that's probably the best way I'd recommend if people want to go check out a pretty good catalog of it. Again, you get a free trial and it's only like $5 a month. So there's plenty there. And it's one of those things where, like you were saying, Chad, there is a great autoplay that like, if you really wanted to, you could just have it on and watch a bunch of different ones and that they'll cycle through them for you. But like, obviously they're not going to go, there was a relatively new Looney Tunes show, but I don't know that it ever needs to be touched again. But I just wonder, like, it feels like Looney Tunes is not something that I hear brought up that often anymore, unless you're like us, you're an animation enthusiast, right? It's something that the character is what stood the test of time, which in itself is something I think incredible. I remember watching some videos from Butch Hartman, the guy that created Fairly Odd Parents and a couple other shows for Nickelodeon. And he had mentioned he had this goal that he wanted to create a character that lasted 50 years. Like, that's a cool thing to have as a legacy. And I think his example was talking about Superman, how that's a character that somebody built that became a thing. These have obviously been around. Bugs has been around longer than 50 years. I don't know. I don't know that there's anywhere Looney Tunes can go from here other than, like, I can't imagine someday I'm going to have kids and introduce them to, like, oh yeah, that's a character. What's he from? Oh, we got some education to get you to. Like, you gotta see what they're actually from to know.
Well, that's what I
popular. Did. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it shouldn't be. I saw they did a reboot on it a couple of years back, I think, and I think they thought, oh, we'll just make everybody act like smartasses, like, right. and that's what it is, and that'll. Bugs Bunny will be like this too cool for school smartass. It's like, no, that's not what this is, man. Like, you can't recapture that.
Yeah.
And it's just got to be left alone. It was great because of those people and those directors and the situation and where the country was, and all of these stars aligned to form perfect cartoon making for 2 decades. And that won't happen again. And maybe it will, but it's just so different now. The landscape turned into merchandising. Like, everything was about a cartoon didn't happen unless there was a toy to sell. Yeah. And then, you had a little bit of a reinvention in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then a lot of really great cartoons happened, I think, in the last maybe 10 years. Yeah. You had this resurgence of people doing imaginative things and just creating really interesting worlds. And I got to watch a lot of them because my kids were watching them. And so we would watch Adventure Time. We would watch Clarence. We would watch Gravity Falls. We would watch Gumball. And we still do sometimes. Sometimes it's on. But yeah, those are really cool cartoons, not, in my opinion, as good as Looney Tunes, but I'm sure they would all agree, the makers of those cartoons. But it's cool to see, because I think that, when I was a kid, it probably like in the late 80s, even like in the 80s and into the 90s, there was only cartoons that sold you toys. Like, that was it. Like, and you'd have like an hour on Saturday morning. And I can't believe we went this whole time and did we mention Saturday morning?
I don't even think we said the words Saturday or morning.
So, like, Saturday morning was cartoons. Like, that was when you watched cartoons. That was the only time that networks put on cartoons, was like from, 6 o'clock in the morning to 10:30, 11 o'clock. And a good solid hour of that was Looney Tunes, because it was just stuff they had and they could just put it on and pay the licensing fees, whatever. So like that, Saturday mornings and Looney Tunes were like, that was my go-to. That was what I did every Saturday morning. But I guess my point was, later on, as toys started to sort of outnumber or sort of dominate the cartoon landscape, you see you see everything just sort of go to shit, and like no real humor, nothing really challenging or subversive, nothing really. I just remember like the Pound Puppies and Care Bears and just all this garbage that was on Saturday mornings in the late mid 80s. And now, then I think when Cartoon Network happened and Boomerang happened and whatnot, then you've got like, all these directors now that grew up the same way I did on the same cartoons that I did, that are sort of reinventing their own style and putting their own spin on all these things. And yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it was a pretty shitty decade there for a while. I can't think of any cartoons that came out in that time period that I was like, I gotta see that. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, that, and I think just about any show from the 80s to maybe even early 90s that Brad and I have covered on this show, one of the lines I end up talking about in any research I've done is like, oh, by the way, there was a toy line, or there was a comic book line or something.
Transformers, Turtles, G.I. Joe.
I keep coming back to G.I. Joe as my example of like introducing tons and tons of characters to try to identify that one kid who's going to like pick the character that's him. So he'll get into the series and now buy a bunch of them. And maybe I don't know if that psychology was there or not, but that's what's in my head.
Have you guys seen, you guys had to have seen the Netflix series called, oh gosh, now I've just...
Oh, is it the documentary series about like toys from when we were a kid? I've seen, I haven't watched an episode yet, but I saw there was one on, I want to say He-Man?
I watched the Star Wars one.
So there's one on He-Man, Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Barbie, I think is one other one.
Yeah.
And you have to watch it.
Okay.
Like, it is so good. And the G.I. Joe one is fantastic, but the He-Man one is the best by far. By far, it's the best. You realize that, like, I mean, the animation of the cartoons were all kind of crap, but the stories behind how these things got invented are so good, especially the He-Man one, because it was just a bunch of guys at a toy company going like, I don't know, what kind of crap can we pull out of our butts to sell to kids? I don't know. How about this? All right, let's try it. And then like it worked. And just the stories, man, like I don't want to spoil it because there's so many good little stories. G.I. Joe was pretty good too, though. And that one was another one where, I mean, that property made so much money, like a ridiculous amount of money.
Yeah.
Because they just basically had this half hour long commercial that would run every Saturday or whatever it was.
And it's so weird to see which ones ended up becoming, the nostalgia thing that they are today. Like G.I. Joe, it touched a lot of people when they were kids, so that one stuck around. But basically the show Mask was kind of the same thing, and that was around, but wasn't nearly as popular.
Mask was the GoBots for G.I. Joe, man. Like, it was like not the same thing.
We watched some show. I feel like we've done a handful of shows that were trying to be the Smurfs as much as they could be. Oh, it was
There's a lot of those.
Zorks.
We watched Paw Paws, which was basically somebody described it as Hanna-Barbera's Racism Bears, is what they called the show. But it was basically
tiny Native American bears that lived in the woods.
I vaguely remember that.
And it's no surprise when we look these up and we're like, oh, one season. Got it. Okay, the toys didn't sell. Great.
I remember Gummy Bears had a cartoon.
Yep, we've done that.
I remember, what are some of the other ones?
It's so funny to see so later, too, that even not necessarily based on toys came out that held such high regard to people, because we did an episode of the, I think it was 80s, maybe it was early 90s Ghostbusters cartoon. And I don't think we spoke very highly of it. I guess we didn't really like it when we talked about whatever episode we saw for that particular podcast. And I had a buddy, a personal friend, who felt attacked because that was something that he grew up on, that he was into. So I actually really eager to now dive into this series on Netflix because, man, you might have like some nostalgia for something and maybe you don't realize that like, it was a bunch of people in suits trying to sell something to you, trying to make your parents buy you something.
I remember all those cartoons that came out around movies and being angry because they sounded nothing like the movie character. And that would always bug me. Like, I was one of those kids that could tell like if you swapped a voice actor, I knew it and it was going to bother me. And so when, later, anytime when I was a kid watching, I kind of honed it watching Bugs Bunny and listening to Mel Blanc's voice over and over again. Right. And then when he passed away, his son took over voicing some of the characters, and it just wasn't the same. And I'm like, man, this sucks now. And so anytime they would do a movie, like I loved Ghostbusters when it came out. I went and saw it, I think 2 or 3 times. And so when the cartoon came out, I watched it. I mean, I wasn't in love with it or anything, but it always bugged me that it wasn't the real actors doing the voices. Right. It just always bothered me. The only time that I've ever seen somebody get it really, really close is Kung Fu Panda.
Okay.
So the guy, I don't know who does the voice. When Kung Fu Panda became a series, we watched it for a while, and I was like, holy crap, this guy sounds exactly like Jack Black. It's insane. And it made it seem more high quality for some reason. Because you felt like you're getting the real voice actor.
Right, not just some extra thing they were trying to keep the series going to actually sell it a little bit more.
Right.
Actually, we were just talking last week about how we haven't covered a ton of shows that are, especially modern shows, that are cartoons based on a film. So like the film, I think DreamWorks film Turbo did Turbo Fast. Then they also did a Croods cartoon. We didn't check that out. Because it always just feels like it could, look, the animation quality is going to be great, I'm sure. But it's just like, it looks like they're taking an idea of something that took years to make, which was this one big film, and then just kind of spread it out a little bit more to keep the brand kind of going, So there is still a little bit of that marketing machine here and there. But you mentioned a bunch of our favorites, Adventure Time, Steven Universe, another one we bring up quite a bit, Gravity Falls. Like, these cartoons have had a chance to flourish recently. Even a cartoon like Gravity Falls knowing when to end, just deciding like, well, I've told the stories I want to. One of my favorite cartoons.
That's such a great one. So
was,
good.
Did you see the miniseries Over the Garden Wall? It was a 10-episode series.
That sounds familiar. Let me look at it. If I see it, I'll know it. Over the Garden Wall?
Yeah, I want to say it was Patrick McHale, I think his name is, created it. And I believe he was a storyboard artist on Adventure Time. But it's a 10-episode miniseries. And it tells the story of this journey of these 2 boys through this kind of like dark forest kind of area. They do go to some other places, but just 10 episodes wraps up quite the story. And you kind of, I don't want to spoil the end actually. So, but it's
I remember seeing the art for it. I never watched it. I think this creeped out one of my kids.
Oh yeah. There are definitely some characters. I think in the middle there's, some places and some characters that they visit that even I was like, I can't watch this at night. I'm 30 years old. I can't watch this at night. Like, it's seriously a little scary.
I mean, when I first discovered Adventure Time, when it first came out on, it came out on Cartoon Network, right? I think that's where it came out. And like, I remember the kids were watching it and I was like, whoa, this is some crazy looking art. Like, I've never seen anything like this before. And then I sat down and I was like, wow, this is really trippy. Like, I could see myself like getting wasted and watching this when I was in 20s, because it was so weird and like out there. And that cartoon was great. And then I kind of feel like that became like a thing to be weird and sort of like have awkward timings and awkward silences and weird moments. And I feel like it became too much when, what was the one that I was watching with them? I think it might have been Gumball. I think The Amazing World of Gumball sometimes takes it too far, like the weirdness, and it just becomes sort of like, I don't even know what I'm watching.
Yeah.
And then there was another one. Oh man, I can't remember the name of it now. But if you watch that one, and then we'd watch Clarence. I don't know if you guys ever watched Clarence.
I love Clarence. Yeah.
Clarence is so good. Like, so Clarence is like, that's more of like, I can actually laugh at that because it's, I swear to the episode with the bobcat, or what is it a bobcat?
Oh yeah, bobcat or coyote that's let loose or escaped. Yeah,
it's up in a tree. It's up in a tree, and he's like out late. He woke up way too early, basically. So he's like seeing this whole world that he never saw before because it happens right before he wakes up. Anyway, yeah, that episode is just so good, and that whole like world is great. And I think his stepdad. I don't know if they're actually married or not, but I think his mom's boyfriend is named Chad. So
yeah.
I always like that. That's the one of all the places. Like, I don't really like my name at all. Like, I kind of hate my name because it's sort of synonymous with like basic white guy, and so like whenever I see Chad not represented by like not as like a dude with like, you know, a fancy shirt and
briefcase and
yeah, exactly. So when I see a Chad that's sort of representative of like something a little bit more strange or like more like me, I guess, like I like that.
Yeah. Well, at least you don't get Jake from State Farm comments, which I got today. And for the first time I actually said something to someone, I told them, because I looked it up, I was like, did you know that commercial is 7 years old? Just to let them know that they've been saying that to people for 7 years. But anyway.
So people say that? Like, I wouldn't even think to say that, I guess.
It's, you know, someone takes your coffee order or something and they say name for the order, and I say Jake, and they say from State Farm, and I'm like, are you really?
Oh, do I God, dude. Yeah. That would drive me nuts. I would just start saying Jack. Yeah. Although whenever I get coffee, nobody ever gets my name right, and they sometimes think I'm saying Jack. I've gotten Jack, Chet, Jed.
Nice.
Which maybe I should just change my name to Jed. That actually is a pretty sweet name.
I always want to do something like just say Falcon and see what they'll write down instead, right?
They'll try to write it.
Well, awesome. So I think since we've gotten to the coffee names, we'll wrap this one up. But it's been awesome, Chad, having you on talking about Looney Tunes because you are crazy knowledgeable about the series, whether you know it or not. You've absorbed a lot of that, and I think I learned a ton just talking to you about the series. And now I want to go watch more with my Boomerang subscription because I have that power now.
Go do it. Thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah,
awesome, man.
Great.
Where can people find out where you're at if they want to talk to you about anything, whether it's CG related or Looney Tunes related? Where can people find you?
You can hit me on Twitter, which is just going to be at CGPOV, or you can hit me on Instagram, which I believe my name is. What is my name? Let me look. Chad_GSG. So at Twitter, I'm going to be CGPOV, and Instagram, I'm Chad_GSG.
Cool. And if you guys are watching the video version, his Twitter handle's been up on the screen the entire time. So you'll be able to you can tweet during the show to tell him your favorite Looney Tunes character.
Please do. Please do.
Cool. And Brad, where can people find you when you're not recording another episode of Toon Talk Weekly?
So you can follow me on Twitter. It's at brad, and then blog is digitalhitchhiker.com.
Great. Definitely go check these guys out. If you guys want to follow me over on Twitter, it's at Jacob Williams. And of course, we've got the show. We're at Toon Talk Weekly on Twitter, facebook.com/Toon Talk Weekly. We're over on Google Plus as Toon Talk Weekly as well. I don't know why I still say that, but we are, and I post it there. Our email, if you guys want to get at us, toontalkweekly@gmail.com. You can let us know your thoughts on this episode, maybe some of your favorite Looney Tunes characters, or Looney Tunes episodes, or things related to the series we should check out, or any other cartoons you want to recommend. We get those from time to time as well. And finally, the main hub for the show, toontalkweekly.com. Every single episode in alphabetical order on the page for you guys. That's probably the easiest way to find any of this stuff. And of course, the video versions, check those out. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Help support the show so we keep making fun ones like this. So, Chad, awesome having you on, dude. Thanks so much for this. This is like probably one of the longest episodes Brad and I have ever done, and it's by far one of my favorites.
Oh, wow. Thanks for having me, guys. It's been a lot of fun.
course. And this has been a fun episode of Toon Talk Weekly. We will catch you guys next week with another cartoon.
Take care.
To learn more about the show, visit toontalkweekly.com or follow us on Twitter at Toon Talk Weekly.